Hello and welcome back to the home of British politics, where we talk about what's really happening in Britain today. I'm Jack,
And I'm Olivia. Thanks for joining us.
and today we're talking about cobalt mining in the Congo. And I'll say straight away, this is one of those subjects where the image sold to the public and the reality on the ground are miles apart.
Completely. Because the public is sold this sleek, polished fantasy: electric cars, rechargeable batteries, green growth, clean energy, moral progress.
Yes,
But underneath it,
dust, risk, exploitation, and a supply chain most people never even think about.
exactly. Because if you strip away the slogans, a huge part of this so called clean future starts in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
And not just a little bit of it. Most of the world's mined cobalt comes from there. The US Geological Survey estimates the DRC accounted for 76% of global mined cobalt production in 2024.
Right. So whenever politicians or campaigners bang on about battery power and the future of transport, what they're often not saying out loud is this: the future they're talking about is heavily dependent on the Congo.
And that should immediately trigger some uncomfortable questions.
Like,
Like, who's making the money? Who's doing the digging? Who's carrying the risk? And why is the moral language always strongest at the consumer end and weakest at the extraction end?
that's a brilliant point, actually, because by the time cobalt is inside a battery and the battery is inside a car, it's been sanitized. It looks clean. It looks modern. It looks virtuous.
It's had the suffering scrubbed off it.
Exactly.
Now, let's be fair from the outset. Not every mine is the same. Not every cobalt operation is some lawless hellhole. There are industrial mines, formal operations, compliance systems, audits, all of that exists.
Yes, but
But
But that does not magic away the deeper problem, which is that artisanal mining in the Congo has long been linked to dangerous conditions, weak oversight, and child labor.
And that's not a fringe claim. Amnesty brought global attention to child labour in Congo's cobalt sector years ago. UNICEF has continued to focus on child labour there, and the International Labour Organization launched a project in late 2024 aimed specifically at tackling child labour in artisanal cobalt mining in the DRC.
So this is not some internet conspiracy or some invented scandal. This is a documented problem.
Documented and persistent.
And this is where the whole thing becomes politically explosive, because the public is constantly told, don't ask questions, this is the transition, this is progress, this is the future.
Yes, and the moment you ask where the minerals come from or who extracts them, you're treated like you're being awkward.
Or anti-progress.
Exactly, as if moral scrutiny suddenly becomes inconvenient once it reaches the supply chain.
And that's the hypocrisy, isn't it? The people who are most eager to talk about ethics often go strangely quiet when ethics become materially inconvenient.
Very quiet.
Because it's easy to say you want a cleaner planet. Harder to admit that your version of clean may depend on conditions you'd never tolerate on your own doorstep.
And that's before we even get to China.
Yes, because Congo may mine much of the cobalt, but China dominates a lot of the refining and processing. The IEA says China processes over 70% of cobalt globally.
So there you have it. Congo digs it up, China processes it. The West buys the finished tech, and everyone at the consumer end gets to feel virtuous.
That is the brutal summary, yes.
And that makes cobalt more than a mining story. It's a strategic dependency story.
Which is why the phrase critical minerals matters. These materials are not just commodities now. They're leverage, they're influence, they're industrial muscle.
And once the supply chain becomes that concentrated, it becomes political.
Of course it does.
If most mined cobalt comes from one country and much of the processing sits in another, then governments are exposed, businesses are exposed, entire industries are exposed.
And consumers are misled, frankly.
Go on.
Because consumers are sold the finished morality, not the messy reality. They're sold the end product, not the beginning of the chain.
That's good.
Well, it's true. People see a battery. They don't see a tunnel. They see a charging point. They don't see a child missing school. They see a green ad campaign. They don't see a family breathing mine dust.
And that's the thing. The suffering is buried twice, first underground, then under marketing.
That's exactly it.
Now, some people will say, and it's worth hearing the argument, that Congo shouldn't be written off and that mining itself is not the enemy.
And that's fair.
Yes, it is fair. Congo is rich in mineral resources. It has every right to benefit from them. Mining can create jobs, revenue, infrastructure, and opportunity.
In theory.
In theory.
Because the problem is never just that a country has valuable resources. The problem is who controls the extraction, who controls the value, and whether local people actually benefit.
And too often, they don't benefit enough.
Or they bear the cost, while others take the reward.
Yes, that's true.
And then there's the issue of displacement. Amnesty reported in 2023 that expansion of industrial copper and cobalt mining in parts of the DRC led to forced evictions and grievous human rights abuses affecting communities.
So again, this isn't just about a few isolated bad actors digging with shovels. The wider model itself can generate abuse.
Yes, and this matters because there's a tendency to say, well, industrial mining is formal, therefore it's fine.
And life isn't that simple.
No, a formal structure does not automatically mean a just outcome.
Exactly. It can still mean communities uprooted, unequal deals, pressure on labor, weak transparency, and wealth flowing out while locals remain poor.
Which is why this whole debate should make people much more skeptical of easy slogans.
Such as?
Green equals good. That one.
Yes, it's too simplistic.
Wildly simplistic.
A product can reduce emissions and still be morally compromised.
Thank you.
A supply chain can be lower carbon and still be exploitative.
Exactly.
And a politician can talk endlessly about the ethical future while relying on a deeply murky global extraction network.
Now that is the line.
Because that's what this is really about. Not whether battery technology is useful, it is. Not whether cobalt matters, it does. The real question is whether societies are willing to look honestly at the cost of the things they claim are saving the world.
And so far, I'd say not nearly enough.
No, not nearly enough.
Because once people looked seriously at oil, gas, and sweatshop labor, they were told to care. They were told ethics mattered. Fine.
Quite right.
But then when it comes to battery minerals, suddenly everyone gets nervous about too much scrutiny.
Because scrutiny threatens the brand.
Exactly. It threatens the comforting story.
And here's another uncomfortable truth. This isn't even a stable economic miracle. Cobalt prices have been volatile. The African Development Bank noted a sharp drop from about $82,000 per metric ton in 2022 to roughly $21,550 in early 2025.
So even the economics are unstable.
Yes, which means the people closest to the ground can get squeezed from both directions, by bad conditions when demand is strong, and by collapsing prices when the market turns.
And that is why neat narratives fall apart the moment you actually inspect them.
Exactly.
Because this isn't a fairy tale about heroic innovation, it's a global supply chain with all the usual ingredients: dependency, power imbalance, risk transfer, and image management.
That is very well put.
And the image management matters, because a lot of what the public gets is not information, it's framing.
Go on.
They're shown the showroom, not the mine, the aspiration, not the extraction, the virtue, not the cost.
And once you see that, you can't really unsee it.
Now,
So where does that leave us?
it leaves us needing a more honest debate. one that doesn't collapse into propaganda either way.
Beemin.
Meaning this: no, cobalt does not prove technology is evil. No, it doesn't mean the world should abandon Congo. No, it doesn't mean batteries are pointless. But it does mean the public deserves the truth.
Which is
That modern supply chains are morally messy, that clean energy is not automatically clean in every sense, and that if the future depends on Congo's minerals, then the world has a direct responsibility to care how those minerals are produced.
labor protections,
Yes.
traceability,
Yes.
community rights,
Yes.
real enforcement, not just glossy ESG brochures.
Definitely yes.
Because without that, all we've got is a more sophisticated way of hiding the dirt.
Exactly. Cleaner branding, same old blind spots.
And maybe that's the real line to end on. We are told the future is green, fine, but green is not the same as clean, and clean is not the same as just.
And until the people at the very start of the supply chain are treated properly, all the moral grandstanding at the end of it rings a bit hollow.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with somebody who still thinks battery politics is simple.
And next time someone tells you the future is unquestionably clean, ask them where the cobalt came from.
See you next time.